Look at the engine of your car. Look at the automated assembly lines building our modern world. Look at the complex robotics driving the future of human industry. When you think of the first programmable robots, complex gear systems, or the crankshaft that literally powers the mechanical age, who do you picture? You were taught to revere the visionary sketches of Leonardo da Vinci. You were told to picture the grimy, booming factories of the British Industrial Revolution. You were taught that the West, pulling itself out of the Dark Ages, spontaneously invented automation and complex machinery. You were told that the concept of a machine doing the work of a human being is the ultimate, undisputed triumph of European intellect. But the absolute foundational blueprint for modern mechanics was not drafted in Renaissance Italy. The programmable robot was not invented in Victorian England. The exact mechanical systems that power the modern world were engineered over 300 years earlier by a Muslim genius in Mesopotamia. This is the buried record, and today we are peeling back the layers on the mechanical heist and how a 12th century Muslim engineer actually invented robotics. What follows is the story of massive technological appropriation that the Western industrial establishment absolutely does not want you to know. If you are the kind of person who questions the foundational myths of Western supremacy, if you want to know the actual history of how the modern mechanical world was built, you are in the right place. Hit subscribe. We dig into buried records like this every single day. Let us begin by looking at the official timeline, the version of engineering history you were tested on in school. The narrative of the machine is perhaps the most fiercely guarded cultural myth in the Western world, because it is the ultimate proof the West uses to legitimize its industrial, economic, and military dominance over the rest of the globe. The textbook tells you a story of a Europe trapped in the technological wasteland of the Middle Ages. For centuries, the West relied on basic, primitive tools, animal labor, and sheer human muscle. Then, according to the standard, highly curated narrative, an absolute miracle occurs. Europe wakes up from the dark. In the 14th and 15th centuries, complex clockwork is miraculously perfected in the grand cathedrals of Europe. Then comes the ultimate hero of Western engineering. Leonardo da Vinci sits in his studio in Italy and sketches the first automated knights, complex water pumps, and flying machines. He is universally crowned the father of invention. We are taught that his mind alone bridged the gap between medieval hand tools and the future of automation. Centuries later, the narrative continues. European engineers invent the crankshaft and the camshaft. They use these massive, complex, interlocking gears to birth the steam engine, launching the British Industrial Revolution. The West completely crowns itself the absolute, isolated genius of the mechanical age. They proudly declare that the concept of programmable machines, automated robotics, and engine mechanics is the pure, unadulterated invention of the European mind. They use this narrative to position the West as the ultimate, unquestionable architect of human progress. But if you actually dig into the historical archives, if you look at the physical timelines of mechanical engineering, and if you look at the highly advanced, fully automated technological empires of the Islamic world, centuries before Leonardo da Vinci ever picked up a pen, that beautiful, isolated narrative of Western industrial genius completely collapses. To find the true, original father of robotics and the architect of the machine age, we have to completely abandon the damp, freezing workshops of medieval Europe. We have to travel back in time, over 300 years before the European Renaissance. We have to travel to the vibrant, highly advanced civilization of 12th century Mesopotamia. In the year 1206, a brilliant chief engineer named Ismail Al-Jazari was working in the opulent Artukid Palace in what is modern-day Turkey. Al-Jazari was not just a theoretical philosopher dreaming about flying machines that would never actually be built. He was a master craftsman, a pragmatic builder, and an absolute mechanical genius who got his hands dirty building the machines that ran an empire. After decades of relentless experimentation, Al-Jazari published his magnum opus. It was titled The Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. This was not a vague philosophical text. It was a massive, highly detailed, intensely practical engineering manual. Inside this book, Al-Jazari explicitly detailed the construction of 50 massive, incredibly complex mechanical devices. And within those pages lies the absolute, undeniable proof that the West did not invent the modern world. They copied it. Let us look at the absolute beating heart of the Industrial Revolution and the modern automobile engine, the crankshaft. The crankshaft is a mechanical part that translates continuous rotary motion into linear back-and-forth motion. Without the crankshaft, you do not have a steam engine. Without the crankshaft, you do not have a modern car, a locomotive, or a factory. Western textbooks almost universally credit European engineers of the 15th and 16th centuries with inventing this world-changing mechanism. But in 1206, Al-Jazari explicitly drew, engineered, and built the world's first known crankshaft and camshaft. He designed massive twin-cylinder water pumps driven by water wheels. The water wheel turned the gears, which turned the crankshaft, which pushed the pistons back and forth to pump massive amounts of water into the city. He had completely engineered the absolute foundational mechanics of the engine, hundreds of years before the Industrial Revolution was even a concept in Europe. But Al-Jazari did not stop at heavy industry. He moved on to something vastly more terrifying to the Western narrative. He invented the robot. Long before Da Vinci sketched a mechanical knight, Al-Jazari was building fully functional, highly complex automata to entertain and serve the royal court. He built automated peacocks that dispensed water. He built automated servants that would physically hand you a towel. But his absolute masterpiece was a mechanical boat featuring 4 robotic musicians. This was not a simple wind-up toy. The boat floated on a lake, and the 4 robotic figures would physically play drums, a harp, and a flute. And here is the absolute most mind-blowing part of this invention. The robotic drummers were not just repeating a single, static motion. Al-Jazari engineered a massive, rotating cylinder covered in small, adjustable pegs. These pegs would strike levers that operated the robotic arms. By physically moving the pegs around the cylinder, the operator could make the robotic drummers play entirely different rhythms and entirely different songs. Do you realize what that is? That is not just a machine. That is physical computer programming. Al-Jazari had invented the concept of the programmable machine. He had engineered the world's first programmable robot, using physical binary logic through pegs and cams in the 12th century. He had constructed the exact mechanical and logical architecture of modern automation. He defined the crankshaft, the escapement mechanism, and the programmable gear system. So, a massive, terrifying question emerges for the defenders of the Western technological myth. If the absolute foundational blueprint for the machine age, the engine, and the programmable robot were all invented, published, and physically built in the Islamic world in 1206, how did those exact same complex gears and mechanical systems suddenly become the quote-unquote original cornerstone of Leonardo da Vinci's genius and the European Industrial Revolution? To answer that terrifying question, we have to completely shatter the romanticized image of the isolated Renaissance genius. We have to look at the massive, highly organized, and deliberately obscured technological extraction network of the Middle Ages. You are taught that the mechanical awakening of Europe was a closed intellectual loop. You are told that in the workshops of Italy and the grand cathedrals of England, European craftsmen simply started tinkering with metal and spontaneously invented complex gear systems. The Western narrative violently insists that the architecture of the machine is a purely European invention, completely untainted by the outside world. But the physical and geographical reality of the 12th and 13th centuries destroys that myth completely. During this time, Northern Europe was, mechanically speaking, in the dark. They had basic water mills and simple animal-driven plows, but they did not have the complex, interlocking gear matrices, the segmented gears, or the programmable camshafts required for true automation. But just across the Mediterranean, and directly across the Pyrenees Mountains in Spain, the Islamic world was operating a massive, highly sophisticated mechanical empire. And European engineers knew it. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe experienced a massive technological hunger. This hunger was satisfied through 2 massive, bloody, and highly lucrative collision points: the Crusades in the Middle East and the gradual Christian conquest of Islamic Spain. When the European crusaders, merchants, and scholars marched into Islamic cities, they did not just find gold, silk, and spices. They found massive, towering, automated public water clocks. They found complex agricultural machines automatically raising water from the rivers, using intricate, self-regulating gear systems. They saw automated mechanical toys and programmable musical boats entertaining the royal courts. The Europeans were absolutely mesmerized by the sheer, terrifying mechanical superiority of the Islamic world, and they immediately launched one of the most aggressive technological transfers in human history. European monks and engineers flooded into Islamic Spain, specifically to cities like Toledo, to translate Arabic engineering manuals and mathematical treatises into Latin. Returning crusaders literally packed up complex Islamic water clocks and gear assemblies, physically transporting them back to the royal courts of Europe to be studied, disassembled, and reverse-engineered. Let us look at the exact mechanisms they extracted. You are taught that the massive mechanical clock, appearing in European cathedrals in the 14th century, is the absolute crowning achievement of the Western Middle Ages. You are told it was the definitive spark that ignited the mechanical age, proving the superior rationality and organization of the European mind. But the European mechanical clock did not fall from the sky. It was a direct, undeniable, evolutionary descendant of the highly advanced water clocks built by engineers like Al-Jazari. Al-Jazari built massive, monumental timekeeping devices, like his famous elephant clock. It used complex, weight-driven systems, precisely regulated sinking bowls, and automated mechanical figures that would physically strike cymbals and move every single hour. He perfected the heavy-duty escapement mechanism, the absolute critical piece of engineering that controls the release of energy in a clock, allowing it to tick at a steady, mathematically precise rate. When European craftsmen built their first weight-driven cathedral clocks, they did not invent the escapement mechanism out of thin air. They directly adapted the exact mechanical logic that had been operating in Islamic water clocks for centuries. The mechanical heartbeat of the European clock was completely forged in the Middle East. But the absolute greatest technological theft occurred during the European Renaissance. Let us look at the ultimate, undisputed god of Western engineering, Leonardo da Vinci. The Western world worships da Vinci as the visionary who single-handedly sketched the future. We look at his famous, highly guarded notebooks, filled with complex gears, water-raising machines, and automated figures, and we are told this is the absolute proof of unparalleled, original European genius. We are taught that his mind alone bridged the gap between the medieval world and the industrial future. But da Vinci did not invent automation. By the time da Vinci was sketching in 15th century Italy, the technological blueprints of the Islamic world had been actively circulating through the Italian peninsula for over 200 years. Italy, specifically Venice and Florence, were the massive maritime trading hubs of the Mediterranean. They were in constant, intimate contact with the Islamic world. Italian engineers and merchants were actively importing Arabic technological treatises and witnessing Islamic machines firsthand. Da Vinci was not operating in a vacuum. He was breathing the exact intellectual air that had been heavily saturated by the imported mechanics of Al-Jazari. When you actually look at da Vinci's famous sketches of water-raising machines, and you place them side by side with the engineering diagrams drawn by Al-Jazari in 1206, the illusion of da Vinci's isolated genius completely evaporates. Al-Jazari designed a massive, automated water pump driven by a flume beam. It used complex, interlocking segmental gears that only have teeth on one specific part of the wheel, allowing them to engage and disengage precisely to create alternating motion. It was an absolute masterpiece of mechanical engineering. Centuries later, da Vinci sketched an almost identical machine, using the exact same highly specific segmental gears to achieve the exact same alternating motion. Da Vinci did not invent the segmental gear. He did not invent the automated water pump. He did not invent the mechanical knight. He was iterating on, illustrating, and westernizing a vast, pre-existing mechanical architecture that had been perfected by Islamic engineers centuries prior. He was a brilliant artist, undeniably, but mechanically, he was directly referencing the blueprints of the East. Yet, the Western academic establishment, desperate to crown a European savior of science and engineering, completely erased the Islamic origins of these machines. They took the brilliantly engineered gear systems of Mesopotamia, slapped an Italian name on them, and passed them off as the spontaneous, miraculous invention of the Renaissance mind. They took the programmable robot, the camshaft, and the segmented gear, and rebranded them as the supreme manifestation of the European intellect. But the heist does not stop in the Renaissance. The most devastating, world-altering theft was yet to come. Because the gears and cams of Al-Jazari were not just destined to become toys or clockwork. They were about to be weaponized. How did the exact mechanical systems invented in a 12th century Islamic palace directly power the brutal, globe-spanning factories of the British Empire? To understand the ultimate weaponization of this stolen technology, you have to look at the absolute crown jewel of the Western world, the British Industrial Revolution. You are taught that in the 18th century, brilliant British engineers like Thomas Newcomen and James Watt miraculously invented the steam engine. You are told that this single invention completely separated the advanced, industrialized West from the primitive, agrarian East. The steam engine powered the massive textile mills, the locomotives, and the ironclads that allowed the British Empire to aggressively colonize the planet. But a steam engine is completely useless without one highly specific, highly advanced mechanical translation. When steam expands inside an engine, it pushes a heavy metal piston in a straight, linear line, up and down, back and forth. But up and down motion does not turn a locomotive wheel. It does not spin the massive gears of a factory loom. You have to figure out a way to translate that violent, straight-line energy into a smooth, continuous, spinning circle. To do that, you need a crankshaft attached to a connecting rod. Western textbooks will proudly tell you that European engineers pioneered this complex kinetic geometry during the Industrial Revolution. They claim it was the ultimate, undisputed triumph of Western mechanical rationality. But if you open Al-Jazari's 12th century manual, the exact, flawless mechanical blueprint for the crankshaft and the connecting rod is sitting right there on the page, drawn with absolute mathematical precision. Al-Jazari did not just draw it, he physically built it. He used the exact system of a crankshaft and a connecting rod to translate the rotary motion of a water wheel into the linear, back-and-forth pulling motion of his massive twin-cylinder water pumps. He had successfully engineered the absolute, fundamental kinetic translation that makes all modern engines possible. The British engineers of the 18th century did not invent the mechanics of the Industrial Revolution. They simply applied high-pressure steam to the exact mechanical architecture that an Islamic engineer had perfected 600 years earlier. But the West did not just steal the math and the gears. They stole the mechanical soul of the machine and completely, violently corrupted its purpose. When you read Al-Jazari's manual, you are not just reading a book of cold, industrial schematics. You are reading the philosophy of a civilization that viewed engineering as a way to sustain and beautify human life. Al-Jazari used his brilliant mechanics to raise water for farmers, to create public clocks that regulated the peaceful flow of the city, and to build programmable musical boats that brought joy to the human spirit. His machines were designed to exist in harmony with the natural world. When the British Empire appropriated these exact same mechanical principles, they stripped away the harmony and weaponized the gears. They took the crankshaft, the connecting rod, and the segmented gear, and they used them to build the dark, soot-choked, nightmarish factories of the Industrial Revolution. They used the mechanics of the East to mass-produce the rifles, the artillery, and the heavily armored warships that they then used to subjugate, conquer, and colonize the very Islamic societies that had invented those mechanics in the first place. They took the profound, life-sustaining engineering of the Islamic Golden Age and turned it into an engine of global extraction. So, how did the West successfully execute this massive technological cover-up? How did they manage to completely erase Al-Jazari from the global timeline of human innovation? To understand the erasure, you have to look at the violent rewriting of history during the 19th and 20th centuries. As the British and French empires expanded across the Middle East and North Africa, they needed a powerful psychological justification for their brutal economic and military conquests. They needed a historical narrative that absolutely proved the Western mind was biologically and intellectually superior to the rest of the planet. They had to construct a myth that the East was fundamentally stagnant, mystical, and utterly incapable of rational mechanical thought. They had to claim that the concepts of automation, heavy engineering, and technological progress were the exclusive, copyrighted property of the white European male. And that meant completely severing the mechanical timeline. If the British Empire admitted that the very crankshafts powering their mighty locomotives and the gears running their massive textile mills were actually invented by a 12th century Muslim engineer from Mesopotamia, the entire intellectual justification for European supremacy would instantly shatter. They could not claim to be bringing the light of civilization and industry to the backward East if they were forced to admit that the East had actually taught them how to build the machine. So, the Western academic and industrial establishment executed a massive, highly deliberate campaign of historical amnesia. When Western historians wrote the definitive, authorized history of technology, they deliberately drew a straight, unbroken line from the ancient Greeks, completely skipped over the centuries of the Islamic Golden Age, and landed directly in the lap of the European Renaissance and the British Industrial Revolution. They took Al-Jazari, a man who had literally built the world's first programmable robot and the first crankshaft over 300 years before Da Vinci, and they quietly scrubbed his name from the engineering curriculum. They took the brilliantly engineered gear systems of the Islamic world, smashed the original Arabic names off the foundation, and slapped a European patent on them. They built the modern industrial world on a stolen blueprint. Today, we live in a world completely dictated by automation, programming, and mechanical power. We build massive, multi-billion-dollar tech empires in Silicon Valley. We revere men like Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, and Henry Ford as the ultimate, unquestionable pioneers of human progress. We sit in university engineering classes and nod along as professors praise the unique, unparalleled, isolated genius of the European Industrial Revolution. We are told that the West alone crawled out of the dirt and figured out how to automate the world. But the modern mechanical mind was not born in a British factory. The programmable robot was not invented in a modern tech lab. The mechanical heartbeat of the modern world was entirely awakened, shaped, and permanently defined by a Muslim engineer in 12th century Mesopotamia. The Industrial Revolution is not a spontaneous European miracle. It is a massive, highly successful technological heist. The West didn't invent the machine. They simply stole the gears from the Islamic world, painted them over with British soot, and then convinced the rest of the planet that they had invented the very concept of the engine. Everything you just heard is documented. The massive, undeniable engineering diagrams of Al-Jazari's 1206 Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices are a physical, historical reality. The exact structural presence of the crankshaft, the connecting rod, the segmented gear, and the programmable cam in the Islamic world, centuries before Europe utilized them, is an undisputed physical fact. The undeniable mirroring of these exact machines in the later notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci is sitting right there in the archives. The question isn't whether it's true. The question is, why is the true father of robotics and the mechanical age deliberately kept out of your textbook? If this completely shattered how you see the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the machine, and the myth of Western technological supremacy, share it with someone who needs to hear this. The buried record demands the truth. Subscribe, and we will keep digging.